I'm Alan Bourne at Amati, and I'm delighted to share with you this first in a new series of podcasts on the changing world of assessment. In today's session, we'll be focusing on how organisations need to adapt to Gen AI in assessment. And I'm delighted to introduce Neil Morelli, Chief Organisational Psychologist at Codility, to share his expertise with us on this topic. So Neil, welcome. And can I ask you to briefly introduce yourself and maybe share a bit about your work at Codility in this area?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Al. It's great to be here. We've been really passionate about this space and this topic at Codility because 2 years ago, when ChatGPT was launched, we all had to understand and come to terms with how generative AI is changing software engineering as a job domain, as a function, and how we're going to assess technical skills, because that's essentially what Codility does. We assess over 100 different programming languages and frameworks and technologies. We assess tech skills. So with AIs being one of the best use cases for it is coding right now. We really have to understand that deeply. So it's something that we've studied a lot and learned a lot about.
And absolutely, in that space, clearly Gen AI is a tool that can be used in the world of coding, as well as sort of presenting some interesting issues about, are people cheating or is it helping them or whatever. So from what you've learned, Neil, what do you think organisations need to do to adapt to this sort of technology being ubiquitous for candidates? So something that candidates can use. How are you approaching that?
Yeah, well, what we've heard firsthand from customers and from clients that we work with is there's just a new normal to how candidates are going through their hiring process. Almost all of their stakeholders and decision makers internally are concerned about what the impact of generative AI could be on the hiring process around finding good signal and really having a high integrity signal around what candidate skill proficiencies are. So I think one of the best things for leaders to really come to terms with right now is that it just really can't be status quo business as usual when it comes to hiring in this new generative AI era. We really have to adapt processes. It might even be thinking about things in new, creative, fresh ways. It can't just be the traditional resume screen with a quick interview and you're good. I think we really need to push the envelope and understand that, hey, right now we all care about mitigating cheating and potential plagiarism and candidates misrepresenting themselves. But in the near future, this will be, by this I mean using generative AI at work and in the hiring process. This will be something that is ubiquitous, that everyone accepts as just the standard, pretty much. Thinking about how to integrate it and work together with the technology, that is really more of a mindset shift that I think most leaders need to go through. Instead of pushing against it and being very fearful of it, coming to terms with this will be the new normal and charting a path forward is, I think, maybe the best first step.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was a way of putting it I heard a little while ago, which was everybody's using Gen AI. They just haven't, not everyone's told their boss yet, which is clearly a lot of people are making use of the technology. But I'm quite curious about your thoughts, expanding a bit on, is it cheating or not to use it in assessment? Or is it and I know you've been doing some things around this, is it more a case of work out how to reshape assessment a bit in order to make it acceptable to have sort of Gen AI used within that context? So interested in your view on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's one of the key questions. What does cheating mean? And if we had said, well, it's using any kind of resource whatsoever in any kind of technical assessment. So, I'm focusing on technical assessment. We can talk about the wider domain space of assessments in just a moment. But and when it comes to work samples or skill demonstrations, anything like that, is using any outside resource considered cheating? Well, in the past, it really hasn't. If you have to reference something on Stack Overflow, if you have to Google something, that's how developers work. That's how they do their jobs. So some element of that is been accepted and has been appropriate because it accurately reflects, it represents the work that's done and how the work is done. So I would
Yeah.
argue that any resource or any reference to something like ChatGPT isn't necessarily cheating. And in fact, as I said earlier, it's going to be more and more integrated. So that will also be an expectation in the future. I think I think organizations will really have to understand where they stand on that spectrum of what does cheating mean to them, and likely update their definitions of that, and what are the
Yeah.
associated behaviors with cheating. So I think it's a
Yeah.
really important
Yeah.
question. I don't have the one universal answer, but I think it's a good question to ask.
Yeah, I think there's a thread in there that you pick out as well, which is what's the most realistic sort of comparison to what they're actually going to do in the job, right? So if in the
Yep.
job it's a resource that you have available, then that puts a certain color on it, I think, as well. It's a bit like these days most numerical tests you're allowed to use a calculator, I guess, right? Not all of them, but most of them. Whilst back in the day that would have been an anathema, surely. In nowadays, no bats an eyelid. So that might be illustrative of how it'll evolve. Let's see.
I
So,
was just writing a piece on this, looking back at the calculator's introduction into curriculum and then even into
okay,
standardized
sure,
testing. And
yeah,
as you said, um, it wasn't considered, it wasn't appropriate. But I think even in the 70s, it was seen as, hey, this will help even improve students' attitudes towards math, and it will give them a little bit more confidence. And maybe really what we
yeah,
care about is their numerical problem solving rather than their arithmetic ability. And I think in a similar way, we're
yeah,
allowing candidates, or we're allowing engineers to use AI assistants to increase their job satisfaction, and it helps them to do the parts of the job
absolutely,
that they
yeah,
like to do best. That's what I've heard from engineers that have
yeah,
really
exactly,
adopted it
yeah.
and see the potential in it.
Clearly, there's a
Sure.
piece there that we were sort of getting at around how do we represent the tasks people are going to do in the job, or what skills they need, right? So that's obviously affecting how we design assessments. What's your sort of wider view about how Gen AI technologies could improve how assessment is done? We talked about skills testing, but there's a wider canvas than that. So what's your views about where the innovation opportunities are?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I see coming down the road, we're not here yet. And I think we have to pace our progress and our innovation with what customers and organizations are comfortable with and really feel like they're ready for, in terms of these are the expectations
Yeah,
on the job that translates down into the hiring requirements, and then the
yeah,
steps or the tools and methodologies to evaluate those requirements. So I think we're a little bit ahead, but where I see it going is, for a long time, we've had computer adaptive testing in assessments for multiple choice type items. But for going forward, we could have more adaptive work sample type items, simulation
yeah,
types of scenarios. And so that element of the generative AI being able to create content within guidelines, within guardrails, I think could make
mm,
these types of assessments both more dynamic and maybe even
yeah,
more accurate, because you can kind of approximate where someone's true level is by how they're responding to the assessment. And in most simulations and work sample testing today, it's all on rails. Everyone gets the exact same experience no
yeah.
matter where you are at your level. And there's benefits to that standardization, but I think in a similar computer adaptive testing process, we could do that within more interactive, higher job fidelity type simulations.
Yes, because I guess the kind of branching sort of situational assessments and things that exist today tend to be very, whilst they have some spread, they're very linear, right? As opposed to if you having a system that can interpret the qualitative information you've just said to it, it gives you an enormous amount of more latitude to make some, potentially really interesting simulations.
Yeah. And one other element too that's more on the test creation and the test experience side, but I
Yeah,
think there's a lot of opportunity on the output and the result side, the feedback side. That's something that
yeah,
most customers, it's been infeasible to do. Maybe they've not really felt that well equipped to do it well or to do it in a safe way. And with the types of AI assistants that we're looking at integrating and have integrated, we see opportunities to provide more feedback, more developmental feedback, even to candidates that go through the process, which is really, really critical, because
yeah,
most candidates that would reject an assessment are doing so because they feel like they don't get any value from going through that process. They spend an hour or two
absolutely.
of their time and they hear
Yeah,
nothing back, and they feel like that was a
yeah,
waste. Now, there's enough
Yeah.
incentive of getting the job that they continue to do that. But if you're able to offer more feedback and developmental feedback to help them grow, I think that would balance out that kind of value exchange, and they'd be more apt to take assessments going forward.
Yeah, and so feedback with also learning, right? So they're kind of getting something out of doing it, which
Yep,
is, I mean, I think for many years I've kind of, and I know other people have gone, are we still producing PDF reports for output? Is that what all we're going to do? Like surely we can do better than
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
But I think clearly there's quite a big opportunity to do better than that now, isn't there? In terms of, as you were sort of implying, personalised output for the candidate could have quite a big impact. So you experimenting with some different ways of doing that at the moment?
Yeah, we're experimenting with it. We see the opportunity in it. Now the devil's in the details. And again,
Sure.
there are a lot of organizations that don't feel comfortable with providing any kind of feedback. But I think once they see what's possible and that there's relatively low risk and there's more upside to providing that kind of feedback, I think that sentiment will start to change.
Yes, no, that's interesting. I think the US is, because of possibly a bit more concern about litigation, has been, certainly legal teams in corporates have been a little bit slow to allow those things. But I think to your point, the value exchange clearly could be much more positive and much more engaging for the people on the receiving end.
Yeah, there
And
was, I guess anecdotally, there was some research that was looking at how often there have been any kind of legal challenges on the basis of candidate feedback after an assessment.
yeah,
And
okay,
this
yeah,
this one study couldn't find any. And maybe some
okay.
of
Well,
those
that's
cases settle out of court and whatnot, but I think the base rates are very, very low, if not nil.
yeah. So on the basis that they've obviously had a reasonably thorough look at that, then that's pretty good data.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Maybe there's some lurking out there that we don't know about, but
Well,
my educated guess and my perspective is that I don't think companies would get prosecuted about providing feedback. In fact, I think it would engender more positive feelings and sentiment from candidates because they feel like they're getting something out of that experience.
yeah, yes, exactly right. I agree. And just moving on to one of the sort of the areas that knocks on from that. Are there any other sort of risks that you think organisations need to overcome to start, making this adaptation to, candidates using Gen AI and how they might use it? Are there any other sort of key risk areas that concern you?
So I think candidates might, of course, we talked about misrepresentation and impression management and faking and cheating. It could be that perhaps the assessments are off because the skill sets have now changed very, very drastically. And this
Mm,
is a little bit of a different angle, but how are is the assessment strategy and design that organizations are putting forward, are they truly job representative? And so I think you can have some legacy thinking or some assumptions. We've always done it this way. Here's the tech stack. Here's what we focus on. But now the work has really evolved from that, and it's higher order, or maybe now the expectations can be higher within the hiring process, which is a little
yeah,
bit of a counterintuitive thing too, because you think, well, we don't want to scare people off. We don't want it to be too burdensome. We don't want to create friction. But now with AI assistance, you can approach harder, more
yeah.
difficult problems, which actually have more signal in them and they represent the work that's being performed better. So I think one of the risks is maybe a missed opportunity and not evolving, with those changes.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think clearly the shape of what tasks are in the work in work for many jobs is changing enormously. And I'm certainly not seeing a massive effort to move forward on that as quickly as I think you're implying would be really helpful, because clearly there's some skills that will become not a source of significant variance between candidates, right? And then some things that will probably come into the frame. So
Mm-hmm.
unless we're getting on top of that, then we're going to miss a whole bunch of signal that we really want to know about, I think.
Yeah. And it's just
Yeah,
not
cool.
measuring the
And
right things. So I
thinking
think that's the
about,
biggest risk. All right. There's a little bit of lag still.
well, exactly. Yeah, construct validity. If you don't measure the right thing, it probably won't predict much useful, right? So we might want to get that right, And
Yeah.
looking sort
I
of,
think, go ahead.
sorry, go on.
No, you were just talking about validity. And I think that's the key. I mean, that's everything that we care about as assessment scientists, and that's a very technical word for most people, and they might not really spend a lot of time thinking about it. But that's ultimately what they need as well. They need accurate signal and really knowing and understanding what they're measuring, and then the fact that it does actually matter for performance in the job. So all comes back to that.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And look, really interesting to get some time with you just to sort of unpack some of the key trends that are going on, and certainly some of the things that yourself and colleagues at Codility are doing around, I think, proactively engaging with the topic. There's a lot of folks I've seen who are perhaps sort of shying away from getting stuck into it. I think it's really positive to see that proactive engagement. So if you had sort of one main takeaway for the audience from our discussion, what would your sort of key takeaway be for them?
Yeah, I would use this as a great opportunity to refresh some of the high impact hiring processes that you're looking at. So, before it could be, well, we don't really have those triggers or that sense of urgency around making updates. But because of all the things we just talked about, the potential for cheating and plagiarism, the fact that you could have a lower validity experience because it's not the job has now drastically changed, and almost relatively overnight within the past couple of years, the job has changed. We want to make sure that we are getting the right outcomes and the right data to make the best decisions that we can, which have downstream impacts. There might not have been the sense of urgency around that, but now there is. So this is a perfect opportunity to make the business case that your hiring processes need a refresh, and everything will become more calibrated and more well aligned if you take advantage of that. So I would look at it as more of an opportunity rather than a threat.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up as well, actually, because that point you're making around the world of work is being changed enormously by all of these things as well, right? So in a way, that's kind of where the start point is, isn't it? Work out what we need to measure, and then you perhaps work your way back along the journey rather than get caught up in the middle step.
Yeah.
Neil, thank you for sort of sharing those insights, and very much appreciated you joining us today. So thank you, and I'll be sharing this online, and look forward to future conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a really fun topic, so love talking about it.
Great. Thank you.